Welcome to the South and Sideways podcast on the Urban Sentinel channel. I am your host, the Urban Sentinel, and this is podcast episode 05, Barter Town. So let's get into it. For the record, this is not a discussion about the classic Mad Max movie with Mel Gibson and Tina Turner. This episode does, however, delve into the waters of what makes any society function. When a functioning society collapses, not all the pieces fall at once. There's a cacophony of action that goes on before everything hits the bottom and the dust settles. Now, this may take weeks, it may take months, and yes, there are some recent events going on. Haiti, Mali, Burkina Faso, Argentina are a few examples of nations teetering on the brink of total collapse. Overall, in the financial arena, the dominant currency may lower in value before the authorities can effectively regain control. Meaning, if the US dollar were to collapse, the US government would still mandate its use as the national currency, even when other nations pivot to other valued currency systems, such as the proposed but yet not disclosed BRICS nation currency. Citizens are the ones that truly suffer in these situations because they are effectively held prisoner by the very conditions to which the government in any condition operates. Yet, as in every economic storm, there are ways to navigate these waters. Should a condition arise that leaves the majority without either cash in hand or the ability to carry out transactions due to cyber attacks, bank foreclosures, a rapid state of decay would emerge. Now, I know the knee-jerk response is you think of gold, silver, those precious metals, and yes, those have a value and they can be useful, but they are limited in their actual scope. Because when you think about it, an ounce of gold, an ounce of silver, whatever the face value is, number one, is still dictated by an overall market. And when you are in a limited capacity to make exchanges, you are limited to what you can do with that gold. Now, remember, in the initial stages of a collapse, if digital transactions are shut down, a cyber attack infects the banking system, the financial system. Debit and credit cards are going to be useless. The point of sale systems at all retails are going to be ineffective. Banks will, even if the individual bank or bank branch is not immediately affected, will cease transactions because there's no way to effectively or safely catalog any transactions of the money going in and out. They won't want to risk opening themselves up to a potential virus. So what can happen with those situations is you're not going to see a lot of transactions going on. You're not going to have Walmart cashiers with notebook ledgers and pen and paper writing down the item, the cost of the item, adding in the tax with the calculator, and then proffering up the correct amount of change for you with the money that you have. Businesses will more than likely simply shut down unless they themselves can ensure security for their personnel and for their product. They're not going to be doing business as usual. Now, with that being said, that is on a short-term basis that things could go wrong. But with the knowledge or the hope that it will correct itself, to one extent or another, there won't be that much of a dramatic change. However, when it is effectively plain as day that our financial system is not going to right itself after a bank weekend, it's not going to change or improve or go back to the way things were after a week or a month, that it is shut down and it is done for, you move to a different type of currency. A traditional aspect of bartering and trading becomes more prevalent. And there will be nuances, there will be changes, there will be things that are slightly different as you move across the geographical regions of the country. But at its basis, at its core, it's still the same. In a post-apocalyptic world, as it were, that currency, that ability to get something that you want for something that someone else has for someone else or some other type of action goes hand in hand. And you think about right now, present time, you think about flea markets, you think about pawn shops, you think about the church bazaar, you think about the situations where you yourself or a friend have helped someone move in exchange for gas money, pizza and beer, that type of thing. All that seems superficial, but that is how effectively people have gotten along for quite a long time before established currencies were made. Before, yes, the convenience and ease of saying this bag of gold or this bag of salt is worth X amount of money because a government or an overriding agency sets the value. Because if you have, let's say, medical supplies, but you're not a doctor, you're not an EMT, you just have extra over the counter medicines, you've got some prescription medicines, you have band-aids and other things like that. Someone who actually has the need for them will find those to be of a higher value. Now, they may come and offer you something in exchange for that, but you may not have a need for it. And you may not want to go through the effort and the legwork that you would have to do to find someone else that wants it. So you may choose to say, look, I have these medical supplies. You clearly need them. I don't want what you have. I don't want what you're offering. Now, if you can get me this, this, or this, then we can make an exchange. If you can point me in the direction or get me in contact with someone who has something that I want, then I'd be more than willing to change and exchange that for you. And that's something that needs to be taken into account. Simply because you want something and you have something that you feel is of great value does not mean that it's going to be of the same, equal, or greater value to someone else. If you've ever sold anything on eBay or any of those online apps, you effectively find that situation to be prevalent. You put up an item and you post up what you want, what you feel it's worth. Someone else may respond, and even if you've had in bold letters, the price is as it is, or, it's this amount of money, no less, someone's always going to ask, can I get it for this? Or I'll offer you this, because they know that in many cases, it's a natural thing. You add a little bit more to the value so you can profit from it. And even if you were being true blue and honest and you were putting it at the actual book value of whatever that item is, people always want to get a bargain. They would prefer getting something for just a little bit less, whether it's a psychological thing and they just feel like they're more comfortable with that item at that slightly lower price, or it's simply the way that they operate, which tends to be what everyone does. Why would you pay full price for something when you could get it for 10% less, 20% less, 60% less, and still have the same exact item? And with that, when you look at bartering as a form of trade and exchange for those things, whether you have medical expertise, you have carpentry skills, mechanical skills, whether you can sew and repair clothing, whether you have veterinarian skills, whatever it is, even a situation where, depending upon how bad a collapse becomes, if you're an individual that still has working transportation, you have fuel, or you have a greater capacity to get from point A to point B because of your particular skills or the things that you acquire, you will find someone that is willing to pay your price or exchange something for those services. You may have situations where, when you look at those countries that I previously listed, there are plenty of people that they live in that country. They have friends and family in a different part of the country, but they don't have transportation. The social services that were available are no longer available. The national transport system for the trains and the buses are not reliable or not safe. They might be willing to pay someone who does have a car, who does have a truck, to get them from where they're at to where they need to be. In exchange for that, that person may say, oh, you must provide me with X amount of fuel beforehand, or you must provide me with this amount of food, or I'm looking for water, or I need these certain items. Sometimes it's negotiated up front and the payment's done. Other times it's a situation of you get me there and then you get the other half. That is on a case-by-case individual basis. Now, you can say, well, we don't really see a lot of that going on in those countries in the news. Number one, news isn't everywhere and it's not all the time. And number two, in many cases, most people, as it is, tend to stick close to home. They tend to stay in their neighborhoods, in the areas that they are familiar with the people that they're familiar with. Even if they don't know them on an individual basis, you kind of know the people in your neighborhood. You kind of know what's going on. And you stand a far better chance of going to an actual neighbor or a friend or someone from where you live to say, where can we get some more water? Or do you know someone that has medical supplies? Or I'm trying to get baby formula. you stand a much better chance of getting a reliable source that way than simply going on the rumors of, did you hear? 3 towns over, they have this, this, and this. If you go to this location and there's this group, it may be true. It may be absolutely true. And if you choose not to go, you may be missing out on the opportunity that you've been looking for. But in other cases, it may be someone's interpretation, or the news may have been accurate at the time that it was first put out. But by the time it goes from one mouth to one ear to the next mouth down the line, a week may have passed, something may have changed. You may have been into a situation where initially this is what you were looking for, but then in the reality of it, you realize that you needed more of whatever that is, whether it's more medicine or a different type of formula, whatever the case may be, and that location may not be viable anymore. Or it simply may be a situation where people also, as human nature is, look to take advantage, and it could be a setup. Someone could be just simply waiting to see how many people show up, what they're bringing in exchange and trade, and simply rob them on their way there. So they never make it to that location, but all their stuff gets taken, and then later on it shows back up again on the black market. It's not to say that you should look at it from a perspective of everyone is out to get you. You can, and you can continue to live your life that way. You can look at things as the glass is half empty type of situation. You can look at it as the glass is half full and believe that, people will generally try to help each other. It's a 50-50. It is an ebb and flow. It is fluid like water. It changes based upon the environment. It moves in and around everything. You may have a community, you may have a neighborhood that has a church, and though the church may have a small congregation, a small group of parishioners, the people in the neighborhood decide that, yes, this building, this parking lot is a safe place for us to meet up and exchange. This is a good place to put up help wanted, or to ask people, have you seen my cousin, or my next door neighbor is looking for her grandchildren, whatever the case may be. And from that small step, you begin to build a marketplace, a trading post, a location that other people hear about and come to look for supplies, to look for friends, to find help, to at least point them in the right direction. And that's small establishment can become that new location that people build up and garner and gather to over a period of time. That is something that happens, and it can happen any place, anywhere. It's not something that is necessarily predetermined or established. Now, sure, if you are an individual and you've got people of the like mindset, and you happen to be in a situation where you could effectively do that, then that would be something that is sort of on the back burner, in that just in case this happens, then this is what we'll do. But with that being said, having a knowledge of what is useful is the primary thing. Now, definitely food, water, medicines, those are always going to be beneficial to someone, but you have to make a decision. How much of what you have are you willing to part with? Or are you looking at trying to establish a certain normalcy within your radius? Are you trying to hedge your bets that if you keep a little bit of extra water, a couple of extra bags of diapers and baby formula, even though you don't have any children or anything like that, but you know that people in your neighborhood, there are a few people that do, then perhaps that's something that you may think about. But you also have to consider, are you going to be wasting right now your resources of the two primary things in our still functioning society, time and money? Those are the two things that people have to take in consideration that are hard to replace immediately, and sometimes you never get it back. So you have to, again, think, do I want to save up more of my money to buy supplies of things that I know I will need and that I will use? And if by chance I'm in the mood to, or I choose to help someone out in some sort of barter and trade, then I will utilize some of the supplies that I have. And it is what it is. Effectively speaking, as the saying goes, never look a gift horse in the mouth, because someone who's been 5 days without food and they're watching a loved one slowly decline in health, yeah, they may have had particulars about what they would or would not eat and certain things like that. They may have been a person that says, well, I only eat this type of food, or I only use these type of products. But, people change their attitudes very quickly when the decision and the choice is simple between suffering and not suffering. Those limitations tend to go away. So you, to one extent, can look at it as that is what you could offer. Now, if you are an enterprising individual that, let's say, in the chaos of everything going on, and people reflexively, to one extent, go for what they know in a liberating terms of product and produce and everything else off the shelves, and you've decided that that local dollar store has an excess amount of paper products and goods and utensils and baskets and buckets and things that you don't really consider to be essential. And to one extent, they're not, because I look at it this way: when it really comes down to it, whatever you have, if it does not protect you, nourish you, or heal you, it is of little value. Yes, you will have those one-off items and things here and there that are unique to their purpose for their existence and have a very, very limited scope of use, but they're the only things that can be used. But if it's not going to effectively feed you, keep you safe, or fix you when you are all jammed up, you really don't have a need for it. Now, that may be a sort of broad brush spectrum, but when you think about it, a raincoat keeps you dry. That's its primary purpose. Clean socks, or at least socks without holes in them, also help you. First aid materials, Band-Aids, Bactine spray, things like that. These are all small things that can also benefit you, but also means to carry them, transport them. Ways to organize and itemize, those are things that no one thinks about, because it's not something that you go through on a regular basis, because it's also something that is readily available. And if the entire society that we are integrated into collapses, then that regular beat, that regular rhythm is disrupted, and you cannot rely on just going down to the store anymore. You cannot rely on our just-in-time delivery system, because it will have just stopped. And now it becomes whatever is left on the shelves, whatever has not been pilfered, whatever has not been burned to the ground, in many cases is all that there is. So those items suddenly now become of a higher value. And I had mentioned before about gold, the precious metals, and yes, there is still a value, but when you think about it, if you've got that black market hustler saying, oh yeah, I'll take gold chains, earrings, wedding bands, and I'll give you, this water, I'll give you this food, and people need to eat, they need their medicine, so they will gladly exchange it. Now, this person has buckets, 5-gallon buckets full of people's jewelry, diamonds, you name it, all kinds of stuff. And you look at it, this is fantastic. But if pawn shops aren't open because the banks aren't open, if there are no ways to take all of that metal and exchange that for something more, then they really have nothing. Yes, if they know that in 2 or 3 weeks, the virus that went through the digital systems and shut everything down and zeroed out everyone's accounts will be corrected, and everything will go back to the way it was before a cyber attack occurred, then sure, that person makes out, because now they've got 10, 15, 20 pounds worth of precious metals that they can now go back to that pawn shop and say, hey, yeah, I found these. They were on the ground in the bucket, and give me some cash for it. They can take that cash, and then they can go and put that into their bank accounts. That's fine, if you know that that's what's going to happen. And you can say that, great civilizations were built upon, using gold, because the civilization had an organized government on whatever level you want to consider it, that then used that gold in exchange with other nations that were organized and said, we will give you this amount of gold in exchange for your wheat or in exchange for your cattle. That is on a much, much larger scale. And that, again, is what could happen in a collapsed scenario where hyperinflation has put our dollar down to such an extent that, just like after World War II, German citizens were going to their banks, emptying out their bank accounts, pulling out thousands of dollars, Deutschmarks, putting them in wheelbarrows, going down to their local store to buy just enough bread to last them 2, 3, 4 days, to buy a couple of potatoes to keep them alive for, at least a week. In some of these other countries that are currently going through a financial crisis, you have countries where, effectively speaking, toothpaste costs $100,000. Not because it's some special cure-all toothpaste, but because the value of their currency in their nation has lost so much on that scale that all the prices have to be inflated. You have people in those countries that are technically millionaires because their weekly paycheck is $1 million. Now, if you translated that to the U.S. currency, they're only making maybe $8.50, $10, $20 per week at the most. But that's what happens in that sort of hyperinflation where everything gets skewed. And if it's a situation where there is no financial market available because of, aforementioned cyber attacks, or if something happens to our nation's credit standing, if suddenly countries like South Korea, Japan, and other nations that have always used our money right off the top as their primary go-to when it comes to bulk buying and purchases of whatever it may be. If those countries say, yeah, we're done, we're going over to this other currency, or we're sticking with our own currency, whatever the case may be, that value causes a drop in our effective credit standing because we just print money. That's how we solve things. Our government just prints money. Federal Reserve, it does not matter what the situation is. It prints the money. The only reason why the money has any value, the only reason why nations still consider the US dollar to have some level of sustainability is not on good faith that the US always comes through. It's simply because we're still being taxed. And if you're trying to figure out what I mean by that, it's simple. If you can print up $100,000, $100 million, $1 billion overnight and put it out into the market, it's not going to be worth anything. But as long as you tax the citizens of that nation, as long as you can show receipts saying, look, we just raised taxes 15% on fuel costs. We just raised taxes 5% on personal income. We just raised taxes 30% on retirement funds. You're going to look at that as an outside nation, as an outside source. And then when we present as a country, oh, and here's $1 billion to help you out in your country with whatever your situation is in exchange for other favors later on, people will take the money because as far as they're concerned, they see that money that was just printed up out of nowhere being effectively the result of more taxation. If the U.S. said, hey, you know what, we're going to implement a 5% flat tax on personal income and a 20% flat tax on commercial and business income, and we're going to do away with the death tax and inheritance tax and all those other taxes. And once you buy something, you own it. We're not coming after you again. So if you play your cards right and you check the correct boxes on your IRS forms, you may never have to pay taxes again. If something like that were to happen, yes, as U.S. citizens, we'd be like, hey, that's fantastic. But the rest of the countries all around that use our dollar will go, but where is all this money coming from if you just reduced your primary source of income, which is taxation? Because that is the simple fact is the United States government, just like any other government, does not produce anything. They tax, they fee, they fine, they levy, they seize, but they do not produce anything of actual value. They assign a value to something based upon what it is that they've taken from the citizens in taxes, from the businesses in taxes, from other nations in tariffs and everything else. So as long as they keep basically putting the hands into the pockets of everyone else, they can then play the role of, oh, well, we're going to assume that we will collect $3 trillion in taxes, in fees, in tariffs over this upcoming year, so we can easily print up this $3 trillion right now and put that out in aid to these other countries. If you follow the bouncing ball, it's easy to see that, oh, we give one country $100 million because we know that they will purchase weaponry from us, or they will purchase grains from us, or they will exchange what they have to another country, which has a trade agreement with us that we get a cut of their profits from these exchanges because they're using either our equipment or our technology, or we're in a partnership with it. So it's always based upon what we believe we will make down the road, so we can write this check out now and you don't have to worry about it bouncing. But if the system has fallen, if the system has collapsed, barter and trade becomes the local norm. It becomes how you and I, the everyday citizen, survive. And it's on that aspect only is what you need to focus on. I could honestly care less about what actually happens in DC. And yes, you can say, well, it affects all of us, and it does. But what the hell are you actually going to do about it? Realistically, if you were to get up out of your seat and just head down to DC, what are you going to do about it other than most likely get yourself in a pair of handcuffs and in a holding cell? Absolutely nothing. So I'm focused on what realistically could happen, even though right now we, knock on wood, hope that it doesn't. But if it does, looking at the aspects of not having to deal with credit cards, debit cards, because banking systems, credit systems aren't going to be available. Not having to, one extent, yes, worry about going to work, as it were, that would be lovely, but also not having to worry about all the other bills. Now, it's not to say that when there is a financial interruption that you won't have mortgage companies and banks and lenders looking to pull in as many of their assets as they can. But you also have to look at the realistic aspect of it. They can't seize or claim stuff that to one extent they can't sell. If their systems are shut down, their systems are shut down. It's not going to benefit them in any way, shape, or form because there's not going to be some other person that can pay them, that can fill that gap that you are unable to fill. Now, if someone has a particular hard-on for you, if you have a loan from a local bank and they know you by name, by face, and there's been tension between you, and let's say in situations where you have small businesses, farmers, things like that, yeah, someone could be vindictive and say, well, if anything, we're going to make sure that we put in the paperwork and foreclose and seize on this property. Okay, that's what's going to happen. And I'm not trying to get sidetracked on it, but you can only handle what you can handle. So if you look at it this way, the chances are that if this country, the United States of America, suffered some major catastrophe that collapsed the value of our dollar to pretty much worthless zero. And as a side note, I know that some of you are probably thinking, well, it's a fiat currency anyway, it's not really worth anything. I will have an email address that you can contact me, and then you can give me all of your fiat currency that you have in your bank account, because as it is right now, it still pays the bills. If I have a $5 bill and something costs $4.25 at a store, guess what? That $5 bill still has $5 worth of value, and I get 50 cents back. But in the interim, in the aftermath of a collapse of our society, the financial shutdown, where now you are valued based upon what you can do, what you can bring, what you know, that is where the differences are. And when you look ahead in the way that we are currently going, I don't see us as being right there. I don't see us being on the edge of that. But again, there's the natural cause and the unnatural cause. The unnatural cause is that deliberate act of, push that button and this is the response that you're going to get, versus poor mismanagement, poor financing, continued overtaxation of people, excessive government spending without accountability. Yes, that will definitely bring us to a level of financial ruin. But as wild and as crazy and as terrifying of a ride as that's going to be, you still know that it's coming. It's like going to an amusement park and the roller coaster is called the ride of near death. You know that you're not going to die, but you also know that you will probably need a new change of underwear by the time you get off of it, versus an actual external outside force simply shutting the lights off, simply turning off the capability that we have to communicate and interact, and changing the way that we operate on a daily basis. Even if it were a global connected event where multiple nations decide that they're not trusting the US dollar for whatever their individual reasons are, that can quickly change the way everything goes, because then it becomes one nation does it, 3 nations do it, 12 nations do it, and next you know, people are just panicking. Countries and leadership saying, I feel that this isn't the right thing to do, but everyone else is doing it, and I don't want to get stuck holding the bag of useless US dollars, so they start dumping them. But again, it's what it comes down to. If you think about it on a local level, in preparation for that type of thing, it's not to say that you have to have your own mini mart, your own dollar store on hand ready to go. It's just simply start looking at what you have, what you need, and figuring ways that if that were to be the situation, how do you plan on surviving? Because yes, while it would be fantastic to have a year's worth of everything just sitting, waiting for that moment, realistically, I myself and probably 99% of everyone else that is out there is not in that situation financially or physically to have that. So you kind of have to be able to adapt in the moment and on the fly to whatever happens, making plans and preparations, keeping the idea sort of in the back of your mind, working out those scenarios is far easier and less intensive than it would be to actually start putting everything in place for that time where now you become the black market kingpin of your neighborhood, and people, bow down and bend the knee to your will because, you've got the fruit roll-ups and you've got the AA batteries, that sort of situation. But as I said before, it's less about the thing and more about the thought, the understanding that there will always be a need for something. You just have to recognize what the need is and what the value of that thing is and figure out where you are on that scale. Is it something that you can provide? Is it something that you want? Is it something that you feel is necessary, but for who? You have to find that right marketplace. Some cases, the market comes to you. Other times, you have to go out and you have to seek it. You have to figure out what is what. And that's it for now. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.